Okay, Brad, so I'm living in England with my wife, Gloria, and two English friends and I, we decided to go down to Amsterdam. We're touring, we're touring all the museums in Amsterdam are gorgeous. Yeah. And we decided to do the Heineken brewery tour, right? Heineken, obviously the major beer. We go to do the tour at the Heineken brewery. And it's not actually a functioning brewery anymore in downtown Amsterdam. It's sort of a, I don't know what you would call it, dog and pony show kind of a brewery where they brew a little bit of beer, but that's not...
It's for show.
Yes, exactly. Now, as you know, in Amsterdam, English very well adopted. Like a lot of people speak absolutely note-perfect English, right?
Yeah.
We happened to get a tour guide who was 19, 20, 21, weighed about a pound if he weighed anything, right?
Yeah.
His blonde hair is in a flop sweat because it's clearly his first tour that he's ever given because we can tell he's being graded. There's like this older, very strong guy holding a clipboard, and the guy looks like a Master Chief. He's just gigantic. He's a huge sergeant looking dude, right?
Yeah.
So he's like, so he starts out, and my Dutch accent is going to be terrible, so forgive me, but he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Heineken, the best beer in the world. If you'll follow me into this next room," right? And he clearly has learned enough English to know the script, but has not yet mastered English, which is kind of why he's sweating through his shirt. And so we're not trying to be stinkers. We're not trying to be jerks at all. But because there's four of us and there's friends, and because we had just had a couple of Heinekens to start the tour, we were kind of joking around and not paying attention to the tour guide, right? So we were looking at one of those giant brass copper still things that they have that fill up a whole room, and we're talking about it. And he's standing at the doorway. The rest of the tour group has already moved on, and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll join me in the next room, we'll continue our tour of Heineken, the best beer in the world." And we're still talking. We're not trying to be jerks. We're just talking and laughing. And he goes again, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll join me in the next room, we can continue on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll join..." And because he doesn't have a mastery of English, he can't go like, "Hey, come on, guys, we got to keep it moving." So he just keeps defaulting to the script that he's been provided. And the whole time, Gloria pointed this out to me, the whole time he's doing the atom, which if you know public speaking, when guys get nervous, they cross their hands and they cover their genitalia because that's like a standard psychological thing that nervous guys do. It's called the atom. And he's just gripping his genitalia, Brad, going, "Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll follow me to the next room, we'll continue the tour of Heineken, the best beer in the world," right? And then, so we get to finally the end of the tour, and he's just sweating, and that concludes our tour. "Ladies and gentlemen, Heineken, the best beer in the world." And from the background, all of a sudden, the master sergeant like yells in Dutch, "Toiletten! Toiletten!" And the guy clearly goes, "Oh, ladies and gentlemen, the toilets, if you need them, are over here on the left." And then all of a sudden, Brad, out of nowhere, two people suddenly appear on either side and like walk him away. And we're like, wait, what's happening to Hans? Where'd he go? What happened to Hans? And all of a sudden, this very beautiful young Dutch woman with perfect American English comes up and she goes, "All right, well, that concludes our tour of Heineken, the best beer in the world." And we're all like, wait, what happened to Hans? We need to know what happened. Hans back! Oh God, where did it go wrong for Hans?
And to this day, nobody has ever seen Hans again.
No one's ever seen Hans again. Oh God, and on that note, I'm going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Heineken's, the best beer in the world, and making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc.
And I'm his pal, Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of the comics documentary Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/ComicLab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend. We have a great show for everybody. I'm super excited for this one because we've got a really fun mix of questions. But before we get into that, I got to remind everybody that you could be watching this show live right now at patreon.com/ComicLab at the live gab level. We stream this show live right now, and I'm waving to all the folks and friends watching us right now. And there's a live chat in the stream. And of course, if you missed the episode, it is recorded and archived every week. So there's a full archive of the recorded live stream shows. And Brad, today's show is brought to you by the good folks at Wacom at WACOM.com.
That's right. The powerful, portable, professional Wacom One that Dave and I both use in our studios on a nigh daily basis. If it isn't daily, it's nigh daily that we're using these things. They're wonderful, and they allow us to be portable and professional wherever we go. You're not going to find two bigger fans of the Wacom One than these two guys right here.
Nor will you find an ability of to master the English language like being able to say nigh daily than Brad Geiger. It is nigh impossible, nigh invulnerable to say nigh daily. I've never heard of Nigh Daly. Wasn't she the star of that cop show?
You're thinking of Cagney and Lacey.
Yeah, Cagney and Lacey. I couldn't remember it, darn it. The joke got ruined because I couldn't remember Cagney and Lacey. Yeah, Nigh Daly. She was great. She was also in the Buster Scruggs. She was great. She did a great job in that film. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, and she was also, if she has any good taste in digital equipment, a big fan of the powerful portable Wacom One.
No, it's true. We use it and love it every day. And there could not be a more perfect sponsor for the show because Brad and I wholeheartedly endorse the whole Wacom line. We have both the Wacoms and the Pros in our studio and use and love them. So we gave them a huge shout out and a thank you. Our sponsors at Wacom at wacom.com. And Bradley, our first question for the week, my friend. Dun, da, da, da.
Yeah, this one comes in from Jaron, who says, hey, I'm having a great time listening to the show every week, but never thought of a question that you haven't answered until now. I have a Not Safe for Work single tier Patreon where I post 3 to 4 images a month for $2. I now have over 100 images on it, and I feel like it would be all right to take some of the early ones and turn them into ebooks. What do you feel is a good enough length of time to leave exclusive material on Patreon before you turn it into ebooks, etc.? Dave, this actually stands for Not Safe for Work and Safe for Work material, as far as I'm concerned. How long do exclusives have to be exclusive?
Yeah, this is a great question. I don't know that you need to keep exclusives as eternal exclusives, right? I think really the sort of implicit promise is it's almost like an early read with enough time that it feels exclusive. And I think the shortest version is probably 3 months. The safest is probably in the 6-month range. Really, if you really wanted to stretch your own safety in terms of feeling exclusive, a year. But I think any one of those three, frankly, is arguable in terms of like the average reader would find it totally acceptable if it becomes a non-exclusive after 3 months. I don't know, Brad. What do you think? You think that's a fair amount of time there? 3, 6, or 12?
Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail right on the head. Exclusive does not mean forever, and I think once we put so much emphasis on exclusivity that sometimes we kind of get into this mindset that, well, an exclusive is an exclusive, and I've got to keep that exclusive. I think really the line that you don't want to cross has nothing to do with time. It has to do with money, quite frankly. If you've got an exclusive access to your Patreon and people are paying to access your stuff on Patreon, the exclusivity is more about the financial transaction than it is about time. In other words, if I'm paying for somebody to access their Patreon exclusive content, and I see them posting that content on Twitter, even if it's a very, sometimes it happens like immediately, sometimes it's just a week or even a month, but I realize, hey, I'm seeing this stuff that I'm paying for exclusive access to for free on Twitter in a very short amount of time. It's actually the fact that, quite frankly, I can end my Patreon support and still get the access to that stuff very easily that I'm going to drop out because why wouldn't I? Unless I'm a real huge fan of supporting this person. Again, if you go into that aspect of the tip jar, if I really, really am that emotionally invested, maybe I'm going to stay. But for the most part, I'm going to look at that and say, listen, what am I paying money for? I'm going to just follow this person on Twitter and get it for free. So I think that's the main thing you got to look out for. Now, if you're turning these into ebooks and you have to pay for the ebook, nobody's going to give you a big problem. And the same thing goes for doing a Kickstarter and using this material to build a book, like a graphic novel or an art book. Nobody's going to give you any trouble with that. I do think you got to leave it. And Dave's right. I think 3 months is the minimum. 6 months is a very good target. 1 year is maybe overkill.
I do too.
But
Yeah,
you want to hold that stuff back. And then when you do release it, make sure that it's something that you're having people pay for still. But in general, exclusive is not forever. And I think everybody understands that.
Yeah, that's how Brad and I have always been with our physical relationship. That between Brad and I, exclusive is not forever. It's not. It's
that's
just
right. Sometimes it's not even for 5 minutes.
I'm glad I could make it creepy there for a minute. That was good. So the another thing to consider in thinking about something like this is that with Patreon, I try to, with Drive at least, make it so that there is just a bounty of riches, such that if any individual thing is not hitting someone's full expectations, there's still 1 or 2 or 3 other aspects of being a patron that make the whole thing worthwhile.
Yeah.
So if for example, they're like, well, I thought exclusives should be forever. But they're also getting community access and direct commentary with their creator a lot more. They're getting sneak peeks and early reads. They're getting behind the scenes, which no one else is getting. They're getting maybe a giveaway now and again, or a digital thing, or this or that. What I'm getting at is, if your patronage is reliant solely upon these exclusives, if that's the only thing, I would advise you to maybe dip a toe into some other stuff that you could slowly start to roll out, see how tricky it is for you, how time consuming it is. Because frankly, having 2, 3, 4 other things that can sort of boost someone's experience as a patron, I think will help you when you start to bring these exclusives out as ebooks and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. In fact, Dave, you're reading my mind, because that was the next thing I wanted to talk about. This particular question asker, I think, has their Patreon set way too low. I think $2 and I think $2 a month for 4 exclusive pieces is especially at the not safe for work level, is way too low. I think you keep that. My thoughts in general are $2. That $2 Patreon tier is support tier only. You don't give anything beyond what you're already putting out into the world for free at $2.
It's more of a tip jar.
$2 is tip jar level, right?
Okay. Yep.
You don't give any rewards at $2. Again, beyond what you're already giving for free. I would bump that. I would encourage this person to grandfather out that $2 level, unpublish it, make a new $2 level that is just for support, $5 for the content. Keep those 4 pieces, but then go back to a show where it was either the ComicLab or ProTips. Remember, Dave, where I said, here's 15 things you can post on Patreon when you don't know what to post on Patreon?
Right.
I had 15 things. You could easily bump out what you're offering at that $5 level with very little extra work. In fact, in some cases, almost no extra work. Mm-hmm. It's just using what you're already doing. And you could actually offer a whole lot more, justifying your jump to a $5 level. And I think you could probably do that pretty easily. I don't like the idea of anybody giving anything in terms of digital rewards at $2 level. Particularly in this case, I'm going to say I'd like to see you grandfather that $2 level out, build up a $5 level, and then look into those 15 things to post on Patreon and see what happens. Give that a good 2 or 3 months to see if that really takes foot. That's what I think you need to do on that one.
Yeah, well, calling a language tenderfoot timeout here, one of the things that I find interesting about the phrase grandfather out is sort of that we're basically saying, treat this thing the way you would treat your grandfather. Slowly push it to the side and then eventually get rid of it, which is a weird way of like saying that's how we treat our grandfathers.
Yeah, it's like they're still there. You just don't pay attention to them.
You just stop talking to him. He'll be in his easy chair. Just treat those patrons like you do your grandfather. Just don't let him watch Fox News. That's fine. Just don't engage.
Don't engage. Don't engage. He starts talking about, the world events. Just let him sit. Let him sit. Get him a soda.
Get him a tea.
Make sure he's comfortable. And don't engage. Don't engage.
A weird phrase, though. Grandfather out. It's a weird phrase.
Yeah.
I'm curious to go look at the etymology of that when we're done with the show. But yeah, no, I think Brad.
In Patreon, it's called unpublishing. If you want to look up the right term, but yeah, you're just easing that out. You keep all the people that you had at that tier. They're going to still, and you're going to encourage them to jump up because they're going to stop getting those rewards at that tier. But you're going to keep them, but it's just going to disappear that tier so that the new people coming in know what's going on.
You're right that Patreon does call it unpublishing. And you know who else? The Angel of Death also calls it that when he comes to eventually visit. We're eventually unpublished.
I'm going to unpublish you.
I'm going to unpublish the grandfather you grandfathered out. So that's how that works. But I do think, though, that it's a little bit a feeling of imposter syndrome that, well, they paid for these exclusives. There's no way I can now bring them to an ebook. It was only worth it for a patronage. It is, in some sense, have a confidence that it was worth it for an exclusive, and it's worth it for bringing it to an ebook. And I do think 3 or 6 months is probably enough. I do think, like Brad, 12 months is probably too long. But boy, who could ever argue if you did it at 12-month point? If there's a patron that argues about that, then that is a problem. But let's move on to our next question, Brad. I got a question coming in from Robert Clemens over at patreon.com/ComicLab. And Robert writes, how do you know when to halter a system while still telling a good story? And here's what Robert means. For example, several manga magic systems have some limit on them, either a character's health, their resources, there's a curse, all of which, when thought about, can be solved with magic. Same thing with sci-fi or tech stories. So how do you handle limitations in systems in storytellings? Love the show. Keep up the good work. So, Brad, what do you got for Robert on that question? When you're trying to create, like, for example, Green Lantern has this ring that can produce anything, right? I know you know Green Lantern, you big nerd. And so Green Lantern has this ring, but, Brad, there's a limit on it, and it's the most logical limit ever, Brad. What is it?
It's the yellow impurity.
That's right.
And it's a necessary, I love this so much. It's a necessary impurity. If you took the impurity out, the ring stops working. You gotta
is that true? Is that true?
Yes. Green well, in the Silver Age telling, yes, it was a necessary impurity.
How did you get married? All right, keep going.
I ask myself that time and time again. My wife asks herself that question.
This is what you sound like. Well, no, the ring needs the yellow because the impurity, the ring stops working if the yellow's not there. Green Lantern goes back to the Green Lantern Corps on Oa, and he says, why is my ring not working? And they say the yellow is not there. No, so
That's
why
right.
is there...
It's a necessary impurity, and the whole thing was that his Green Lantern ring could not work against anything that was yellow. In the Golden Age, it was he couldn't work against anything that was made out of wood, but it was a construct to do exactly what Robert's talking about. To give yourself limits. Now, how do you do this? There's as many answers to that question as there are stories to be told, right? For Superman, they literally they found kryptonite was not in the first iteration of the Superman stories.
Right.
What happened was they started telling these stories, and now they've got super strength. Now he actually didn't fly for quite a while too. If you go back and look. But now he's got X-ray vision, telescopic vision, super hearing, super cold breath, heat vision. And then it got into in the Silver Age. It got into super ventriloquism, super hypnotism.
That's when the horse came around, right? The super horse.
That's right. And he had a super chimpanzee too.
He had a super chimpanzee.
Oh, I believe so.
Oh my God, Silver Age! What are you doing? That. What are you doing, Silver Age? Okay, keep going.
DC did research that found every time they had some kind of monkey or a primate on the cover,
I knew it.
Sales
I heard
shot
that.
up. Yeah. So then all of a sudden they were having monkeys and gorillas and chimpanzees on the cover every month. They had a whole thing.
I know, because it makes no sense otherwise why Flash would have this giant gorilla as an enemy until you realize that marketing worked. But yeah, so the idea here is that if you overpower OP, as the kids say, a character or a magic system or a sci-fi power system, that it ruins the storytelling because you can't have Achilles being able to wipe out any enemy of the Greek armies unless he has a heel that could kill him. It doesn't. It's not fun anymore. It's not an exciting story because there's no risk. There's no danger. By the way, I love the idea that when the Greeks first came up with the idea of Achilles, it's like, no, there's no ankle. He's plowing through these armies. He's doing great. And then one storyteller was like, oh, you know, it'd be good. What if we dipped a little shit and they were holding his ankle and that part didn't get dipped? And so there's an ankle. And people are like, hey, that's a better story.
That's a good story. Well, yeah, that's exactly it. And with Superman, obviously, they had to invent kryptonite later on just to give me, and also Superman is vulnerable to magic. Those are the two things, kryptonite and magic.
Oh, that's right. He couldn't beat Shazam, right?
Right, because of the magic.
Oh my God! Now who's the guy that's amazing? He got married. It's me. No, Superman could not beat Shazam.
It's a surprise for both of us. But listen, there are and take a look through storytelling. There are so many ways to do this. You could, like, for magic, you can have the protagonist be a very young magic learner, he's just learning how to use it. You can have it be an older magic user that has had some kind of a detriment or a disability or an injury that keeps him from using it well. You can have, and that's one of the big problems with Doctor Strange, by the way, is that it's hard to write him because he can do anything with magic. So now you start to have to introduce maybe something, a mental block or any other number of ways that you can do to address that omnipresent power.
Or even with Strange, it's interesting how the writers figured out quickly that in order to make the story more compelling, objects had to be invested with magic such that the object could be stolen or be missing from the battle, or Strange had to go get the object or retrieve the object or fix the object, because if Strange had all the power in him, it made the story unexciting. But if he needed the great goblet of Goombabong or whatever it was, then, I mean, it's always some stupid name in Strange. You could tell they're just like, who's got marijuana? Names. Anybody in the Marvel offices have marijuana? I need to write some Doctor Strange names.
What is that? Is that a pipe over there? No, that's the wand of Watum. Leave my wand of Watum over there where it was. You've got the Eye of Agamotto. There were some great names.
Oh my God! If you just go through his enemies list is amazing. Yeah. So, but to continue Brad's list, you can also have it where the young acolyte doesn't have a guide, so they have to figure it out on their own, right? And they're stumbling through, or the guidebook is half torn out, and so they know some spells or they don't know other spells. Or you could have it where there's a physical limitation, where the human body can only conduct so much magic. So until they grow up, they can only do so much, and then they get exhausted or tired, or they have to recharge their batteries. To Brad's point, there's 1,000 ways to do this, but the limitation is super key. I'm sorry, Brad. I think I cut you off.
Well, that's that. I mean, you stole my sample. That's exactly what happened with My Hero Academia. Was you've got a young hero, when he uses his superpower, it actually damages his body. And if you see the anime,
who's this, All Might, or
this is I'm gonna
two grandpas read My Hero Academia. I don't remember
somebody in the live chat help me out here. You're gonna give me the name.
Character with the hand on his face.
He's the kid with the green hair. There's always a green hair kid.
By the way, I just figured out that the guy with the hand in My Hero Academia, the hand on his face. Did you know that that's his dad's hand?
No.
It's that, I think of that and the Pokemon that wears the skull of his mother. And I'm like, what is with these characters that like wearing physical parts of their parents? I don't know how I feel about this.
No, I did not know about that. Suzu Midoriya. There we go. Midoriya.
Okay, yeah, there we go. Okay.
So yeah, when he uses his superpower, it actually his like, if he throws a punch in the next scene, his arm is all purple and withered, and it's just and there's some themes of that in Dragon Slayer too, or I'm sorry, Demon Slayer. It has a physical toll on the body, so you've got to meter out how much you use it. But here's the deal, Dave. There's a deeper question here, because I don't think the question is actually how do you limit the story, because there's an infinite number of answers to that, right? And really, that's where your creativity should be just going off at a full gallop. Here's the real question within the question that we should be talking about. And that is, how many loopholes do you really need to close off to write a good story? Because that's what we're talking about here, is loopholes. You're talking about Doctor Strange casts some magic, and then somebody puts him into a hold, and then you read in the message board or in your comments section, well, wait a minute, why doesn't Doctor Strange just cast the spell of shadows and do blah blah blah? And then you're sitting there as a writer.
The spell of it, you huge nerd. Keep going. Every once in a while, you bring out something. I'm like, he knows too much. He knows too much.
As a sign of a misspent childhood. But yeah, you get trapped, right? And what happens is, and this, I've talked about this in the past, you get all bound up as a writer because you're scared of leaving a loophole open that some smart aleck reader is going to sit there and torture you over, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so you get to this point of how many loopholes do you really have to close off? Obviously, there's real big loopholes that are hard to ignore, right? But then, and all you got to do is follow any Star Wars fan chat any place to find out that there's little itty bitty loopholes that people like to make a big deal about. Dave, how many loopholes do we have to close off? Do we have to close them off? All of them? Do we have to look for every last loophole?
Well, the thing is, no. Hey, no, you don't. You don't. But the problem is, as soon as you introduce magical thinking or action, not thinking, but magical abilities into a story, when you're removed from the story and you're driving home from the movie, you could go, well, wait a minute. Obi-Wan didn't need to fight Darth Vader. Luke Skywalker didn't need to fly an X-Wing. Obi-Wan from the surface of the planet could have crushed the nuclear core using the Force. He didn't need to do any of that. You could have been done and out in 5 minutes, right? And so
this could have been an email.
Yeah, this meeting could have been an email. Yeah. Oh my God, that's funny. That's what I'm getting at is, of course, if you logic your way through any freaking story with Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever it is, an Avengers story, whatever it is, you're going to find loopholes. But the problem is, people want the story. They want the suspension of disbelief that allows them to say, it's all right. A little hand wavium, of like, it's okay. It's fine. It's close enough. And I'll allow it to allow the story to happen. In part, we allow that as human beings because sometimes, have you ever heard the phrase, Brad, that truth is stranger than fiction?
Yes,
in the sense that there are weird causalities in day-to-day life that you're like, there's no way that could have happened. There's no way.
But it did.
And yet it did, right? And so we allow in our storytelling certain stranger fictions that are like, it's fine because I'm enjoying the story, and B, life is weird anyway, so I'll allow it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you'll find out if you write a good story, if you really, and by the way, writing a good story, everything that we've talked about up until now, the magic system, limiting the magic system, all that other stuff, really has very little to do with writing a good story. All this stuff is incidental. It's building blocks at best. Writing a good story is about, number one, generating an emotional connection for your protagonist.
Yes.
It's about, number two, setting up a really, really crucial conflict, right? You have to have a hero who wants a thing or a goal and is being blocked from that thing, right? My old butso statement. You've got somebody with a want or a need, but there's something in the way, so they do something. That's where the good story is. It's got nothing to do with all this other stuff we've been talking about up until now. You have to create an emotional attachment to your protagonist. That's what we call an emotional hook. You have to go in and create a crucible for them to be tortured in. You have to put up an antagonist that is powerful enough to be scary. You have to make your reader want the goal for that protagonist. There has to be some skin in the game. Here's why I want the protagonist to succeed. All of that is where the story is. And by the way, we could take the next 50 episodes of this podcast and just talk about that, right? There's stuff to talk about there forever. But and by the way, the best way to learn that is to read good stories, to write as much as you can, and to read bad stories. That's my 3 tips. If you want to find out what the secret to good storytelling is, read great stories, write, and read bad stories. Because once you've done those 2 things, the third one is going to give you all the learning that you could possibly use, because you're going to say, oh, why are they doing it this way? And you're going to rewrite it in your head. It's like, oh, I would have done this, this, and this. Well, that's all part of the process. So everything that you've talked about, this magic and altering magic, is all great, but that's the creative part. That's kind of well, it's all fun, but that's the low stakes part. Yeah. The real challenge of writing is that other stuff. And if you do that other stuff so well, my fervent belief is that if you do that other stuff so well and you've create a great emotional hook and all that other stuff, then the loopholes, your audience is going to look past those. Why? Because you gave them such a good story.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I have two bits of advice to add on to this. Sometimes when you are aware of a loophole and it's pausing you from using the story because you're like, I see my own plot hole. One way you can write around it is a situation or character that's doing the explaining has 60, 70, 80% of the knowledge needed to explain it, but not 100%. Yeah. And in so doing allows you a little bit of hand waving so that you can say, well, we don't know all the facts. I mean, we don't know how this magic works or how the force works or what, or, you can imagine the sci-fi system or how this faster than light system works. Whatever it is, if you have an imperfect narration of how that system works, it kind of saves your butt as a writer, as an author, because you can the imperfection of that description allows you a little bit of hand waving and allows your audience a little bit of hand waving. You can say like, well, it was explained to us by a 10-year-old. They might not know all the facts, or well, it was explained to us by a senile old woman and she might not know all the facts, or whatever it was, that kind of thing. So that's number one. And number two, my last bit of parting advice is when you're writing a limiter or a halter or a governor on your story, like Superman with kryptonite or magical objects in Doctor Strange. It's a little bit like the version of that song lyric of make it be that the thing that builds you up is the thing that kills you in the end. Because there's a little bit of extra zhuzh when there's a resonance between what makes you strong is what makes you weak. When the Hulk gets absolutely so strong that no one can beat him. No one can physically beat the Hulk. Yet mentally, the Hulk is absolutely deficient, right? So the one thing Stan Lee did super right with the Hulk and with a lot of characters is the thing that builds him up is the thing that can destroy him in the end, Even Superman, he longs for home. He wishes he would love to get rid of his powers and just be home. But you know what kills him? A rock from home. Like those are great little writing
there's
echoes
some poetry
in
there.
Yeah, there's a poetry that the thing that builds you up is what kills you in the end. So when you do write a haltering system or a governor on the powers, my advice is to make it be an echo of what gives them the powers themselves. It makes for a nice little echo in the story.
Yeah, and if you are going to write one of those stories, it is worth the time to take and in your own time before you really start writing. To line up as much of that world building as you can and figure out the answer to some of these questions for yourself before they come up. Right? How does all of this work? And a great example of this, and you can find it online a number of places, is to go back and look at the old original series Bible for Star Trek, the first series with Kirk and Spock. You can find the series Bible, and they have a whole bunch of even like how you address different people, how the ship is laid out, and why. A lot of it was obviously built based on the U.S. military, also because then some of their questions could just be answered by assimilation. But it is worth a little bit of time if you are going to tackle one of these systems that you're building. Take a little bit of time in your own comics Bible and work out how it works in all these different aspects and all these different facets. Even if you change it a little bit along the way, figure that out for yourself because it's going to make it a lot easier down the line when this story does get very complicated and you start to lose track of everything. You always got one place to go back and kind of reground yourself.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention Star Trek because it's one of those cases where the limitations on their storytelling ability actually made for a better long-term story. And by that, I mean the idea of beaming up or beaming down because Roddenberry had originally wanted shuttles and they couldn't afford all the model shots of like going down to this planet. So he's like, beam. They're going to beam each other. They'll beam down to the planet. And that actually ended up being the source of a billion stories and angles and wrinkles in Star Trek and made it more fun and made it more unique that they had to beam this way and that. Or even the fact that the TARDIS is broken in Doctor Who and can't change shape. Well, that's because BBC Wales had a budget of $4 and they're like, you know what? We're going to have one TARDIS.
3 of it on beer.
Yeah, it's a police box. It can't change. There we go. Let's go. Keep going. But it makes it fun. It makes it this iconic thing in the story. So sometimes the limitations you have as a storyteller can also mean better storytelling in the end. So anyway, all that being said, best of luck with this, Robert, and we think you're going to do great with it.
Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute to stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, we're going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
When you do, you're going to get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And exclusive Patreon posts that go even deeper on ComicLab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, which is a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, we get it. No worries.
Yeah, listen, you can still support the show by rating us wherever you get your podcasts.
Just leave a 5-star review and a few kind words.
That, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
Now, everybody, let's talk comics.
Dave, while we were on our short break, a question came up in the live stream, and it was so good, I wanted to bring it up here in regards to our previous topic about haltering a magical system.
Okay.
Joe Tato Chips says, do you all have any thoughts on cartoon physics as related to the previous magic limitations topic? How to limit cartooniness to keep stakes meaningful in a story? So in other words, if you've got a character like SpongeBob, whose arms can go all noodly and stretch all over and stuff like that, and you put him in behind a jail cell, well, we've seen on 100 episodes, he can do anything with his body. How do you really expect that SpongeBob to stay behind the jail cell?
Right. And so what are the stakes when you start to allow certain levels of cartooniness?
Right.
So I think my default is that the more cartoony you make a thing, by the way, perfectly fine. We all love a good Warner Brothers cartoon where the coyote can, get a bomb in the face and he's fine because we've allowed a certain level of cartoony as animators and as audience. But my rule of thumb is that the more cartooniness you allow in, you up the humor level, but you lower the dramatic stakes in the sense that there are no causal effects that are truly lasting. Like the coyote's not going to die from the bomb to the face,
Right.
He's not going to, if the plane hits him in the back, he's going to bounce back and go, mama, but he'll be fine within seconds, So you up the cartooniness. My thought is you up the humor value, but you lower the dramatic stakes. So every cartoon, everyone from Chris Ware to SpongeBob has to find their own balance of cartoony versus realism, because it's got to match the tone and the style of the story. What are your thoughts?
That's true. Brian? You do. There is a give and take there.
Yeah.
My only thought when I saw that question is that Roger Rabbit has already answered this question. If you remember when Roger Rabbit and Eddie Valiant were handcuffed together in that dark room, right? And they had to escape, but they were handcuffed together. And finally, Roger Rabbit just slips out of the handcuff to go check something on the wall, and then he slips back in. And Valiant goes, why didn't you do that before? And Roger says, I couldn't. And he says, why? And Roger says, because before it wouldn't have been funny. And that's the answer, is that yes, SpongeBob has to be trapped behind that jail cell until that moment that it would be funnier for him to noodle arm his way out of there. And until then, he can't get out, not until it's funny.
Well, now I know you are a lover of old things and don't watch anything current more than 1995. Well, let me ask you this.
That's why our friendship has lasted so long.
Oh, you tremendous son of a bitch. Oh God. I know. Well, so let me ask you, though, because I have not watched that film in, 20, 25 years, however old it is. Does it still hold up, Roger Rabbit?
Oh, beautifully. Listen, it is a level of animation storytelling just from a technical aspect. The story is great, but from a technical aspect, that's a level of animation, no exaggeration, that we had never achieved before and we will never achieve again. Like they literally, it's one of those things. that you look at like the pyramids and you say, that's great, but we could never do that again. That's Roger Rabbit. We will never hit that level of animation excellence ever again. It's just never going to happen.
Yeah,
it's worth treasuring for that reason alone.
The thing that continuously astounds me, even having not watched it in decades, is their ability to bring together comics characters from completely different houses, and what it took to convince those houses to allow their prime character to appear on screen together. You know, like that's just cool. That's kind of like when Toy Story was. What Toy Story was able to accomplish between Hasbro and Mattel and other makers, that like anytime you get a corporation or multiple corporations to allow their prime IP to appear as a subsidiary IP to another story, that's always like, there's a billion stories behind that. So I'm always impressed with that with Roger Rabbit.
Yeah,
anyway,
that's a feat. So Dave, it is update time. Do you have any topics from previous shows that you would like to readdress?
Well, I wanted to bring up, Brad, specifically the Eisner Awards, which I believe the submissions, I don't know when this show is going to air. It might be past when submissions are allowed. I think they're allowed up to March 15th or so. So I think we're past that now. But I wanted to mention that I happened to glance and see that the Eisner judges were announced. And I wanted to tell you in a way that I think is only admirable of what the work that the judges have to do, that, dear God, I don't think I ever want to be an Eisner judge.
No,
I really don't. Even if I got asked, I'd be so chuffed, and I would think about it for 5 seconds, but then I would have the heartiest no thanks, because I think people underestimate how many, because you have to read everything, right? Yeah. You're stuck in a hotel room in San Diego for 5 days reading everything in comics for this year. And my thought, Brad, and maybe this is too judgy, but people underestimate how many bad comics are made every year. Yeah. And everybody sends their stuff in.
Of course. No, it would be too much reading for me, number one. And by the way, if you wanted to try to do a comic that would be an Eisner winning comic, that would be one thing you'd have to keep in the back of your mind, is that your first 8 pages have got to be amazing. Because let's face it, these people have a million things to read. So they're only reading the first 8 pages. If it captures them, they'll keep reading. If not, they've got to go on to the next. You've got to have a lock.
You've got to have a system.
In your first 8 pages or so. And I have always kind of believed in the 8 pages rule in general, even before this topic. But you've got to have that story on lock at 8 pages, or else that judge has, because of the limitations of time and space, they've got to go on to the next one.
Right.
It's a really good another reason in favor of getting to the point as a storyteller.
Absolutely.
Get that story moving as quickly as possible.
And they've never leaked a photo of that hotel room that has all the books, but I've heard descriptions of it, and it just sounds like a mid-sized hotel room in San Diego, just stacked to the rafters with comic books. And it's like, God. So, and as I say this every year, by the way, if I don't get nominated for the Eisners this year, the system needs some work. It needs some reform. We need to take a look at it. But if I do get nominated, Brad, as has happened in the past, I think the system is really working. And I think that there's a lot of value in the way that they do it. And so...
Hey, can I tell on myself? Can I make a confession?
Sure.
I haven't put a submission together. I'm not gonna put a submission together. I'm out. There's nothing that I'm gonna do that's gonna be an Eisner winner. I know that. Yeah. And number two, the things that I think are truly Eisner Award winning stuff is the ComicLab podcast, and they don't seem to consider podcasts under journalism. Webcomics.com, I've learned a long time ago, is not being considered. I didn't even put a submission together, and I don't want to say to you listening at home, I want you to put a submission together, because too often web cartoonists say, well, I'm not an official cartoonist, I'm not a professional. You should absolutely be doing, you're probably doing better work than me anyway. But I gave up. I gave up. The ComicLab is never going to be an Eisner winner. Evil Inc., I don't think is going to, it has maybe the best shot out of anything. After Dark, honest to God, which has rock solid storytelling, really good stuff there. I think they're never gonna give an Eisner Award to that. Yeah, they would be too embarrassing. I'm done with it. I'm done. I'm done until they start thinking about podcasts. I'm done. I'm out. I don't want that to discourage you at home.
No, I agree.
But I'm out.
Don't let it discourage you at home. I think you should still submit because keep in mind that Brad and I are on the other side of this. We have submitted. Yeah. We've been nominated. It's fun to go through that process. Yeah. It's fun to go to the award show thinking like, well, maybe I could, and then you realize, oh no, there's no way I'm going to win an Eisner. So I still do it because I like the fun feeling for about a month. After I get nominated, because I was like, all right, I'm good enough in this game. I guess I got some skin here. I can do this. And then every year I go, nah, there's no way in hell. Because really award systems, if you think about whether it's the Grammys, whether it's the Emmys, whether it's the Oscars, whether it's the Eisners, you always just have to remember that they're built and developed and maintained as a system to promote the overall ecosystem of comics. And I don't support the overall ecosystem of comics. I don't exist in the ecosystem of comics. And by that, I mean stores, bookstores, any of that, publishers, distributors. So I stand a very small chance of winning an Eisner. And I don't say that in a mean way. I'd much rather have my career than someone who does live in that ecosystem of comics, right? It's sort of the Faustian bargain that I've made that I like my life, I like my income, I like my editorial control, but I'll never really win an Eisner. But anyway, the point of this whole thing was, boy, I don't want to be an Eisner judge. That seems like that would be a miserable amount of reading. Go with God to the 4 or 5 people that did it this year because, boy, I don't want to do it.
You're doing the Lord's work, but
exactly.
No, I don't think I'd be a good fit. So, Dave, we've got a question coming in from another $5 Patreon backer named Mike, who says this. You're going to love this. I'm teaching a course on concept design and character design for animation. Oh. I'm wondering, as comic artists, how much iteration do you do on new characters or environments before putting them into a final comic? Do you do turnarounds for new characters similar to animation model sheets, expression and action sheets? Dave, how much prep goes into a new character when you design them?
This is a fun question because I have done the full range. I've done everything from a lucky sketch, which got turned into a whole character. Yep. I've done and the far end of it, I've done super in-depth sketching and resketching and exploration and, cool hunting and then turnarounds and bird's eye views and worm's eye views and trying to figure it out. And in both cases, it can work. But I have, in the most part, landed somewhere in the middle, which is I will draw until I find aspects of things that I like, and then I will iterate on those aspects until I have, if I really like the ears, I really like the nose, I'm going to keep iterating on hair until I find one that works. All right, now I got the whole face, now I got to work on the body shape, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. And for me, the most fun version of that is with Drive because it's entirely new species, it's entirely new aliens. And I will be honest, at the beginning of the story, I didn't crap them out, but it was I quickly accepted as okay a version, and I should have kept iterating. And so now, for example, Brad, I have a species coming up that's basically spiders. They're not spiders, but they're going to be kind of sentient spiders. And boy, I am iterating out the yin yang on these guys, trying to get it right because I want it to be repeatable. I want it to be a version that I can draw quickly and repeatably, but at a high level. But I also want it to be uniquely cool and badass looking. So it's taking me a lot of work on this one.
And that's hard to do with all the legs, right? If you've got,
I know you're half joking, but it's true.
No, I'm totally true because all of a sudden gesture gets 10 times as complicated when or in this case, 8 times as complicated because you've got all these arms, you got to decide, are you going to have a spider? Are they going to be upright? Are going to be on there like the way a humanoid would stand?
There are, I think they're called like wood mite spiders in the sense that they're going to be half upright. So it's like at the thorax, they angle up, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be like 6 legs on the ground, 2 legs up, almost like arm-like.
So you've got 2 legs that are their arms, and everything else is 6 legs. And those will be the gestural arms, I think.
Yeah, the two front ones. But anyway,
because you got to make that decision. What are you going to do with all these arms and legs? It becomes tough.
And it also complicates things because if you look at how the average character, gravity rules them. The legs flow down, so you can do waist cutoffs in panels. a spider creature could be a half on the wall. They could be on the roof. It doesn't matter to them, you know, like, so I really have to think about how I'm going to do them from multiple angles, multiple viewpoints. And so it complicates things. So what I'm getting at, though, is that when I approach character designs, repeatability, plus quality, plus uniqueness, plus the silhouette tests, I try to work all that into a character now in a way that I might not have done 10 years ago. But Brad, how about you? I've been talking too much. What do you do when you're bringing out a new character?
Well, same answer as you. I've done the whole gamut. And in part, I'm going to say that animation, because of the nature of animation, it forces them to do it what I would consider to be the right way. In other words, since you're doing animation, this thing has got to be exactly the same from start to finish on this project. So you've got to work out all these bugs. To pardon the pun from our earlier conversation, you got to work out all those bugs now, because you cannot let a character develop the way we would let a character develop in a comic strip, where they keep appearing. The most famous example for me is Opus the Penguin in Bloom County, who started out being drawn one way and ended up being drawn a completely different way. Right. And that all happened in real time in front of our faces, day after day, as that comic was published. That's not technically, I mean, listen, it's allowable. It's part of what we love about comics, quite frankly, is that you see these things change and morph and refine over time. Because of the nature of animation, they just cannot have that. Right. Doesn't make it good, doesn't make it bad. Those are just two different things. I've done it both ways. I've put a character, that Lightning Lady is the best example from my stuff. Lightning Lady was literally a background character in a one joke punchline, was never supposed to come back. And it was clearly, I got such a big reaction from her, and she was kind of fun to write, that I brought her back and then kept bringing her back until really she was the main character to make the jump from Greystone Inn to Evil Inc. She was the first character to come over and start that new storyline, because I knew people were going to follow that character. Not
to steal your thunder, but I had the exact same thing happen with a character in Sheldon named Pickles. He's this ridiculous little bird. I was going to do a one-off joke, literally a one-off joke, and never go back to it again. People liked it so much that I was like, oh, well, that's fun. Why not have fun with it? And so I did a week with him, and now every once in a while I'll go back. Anyway, to your point, some things are just happy accidents of what hits. And in general, I will say that when I'm designing a character, and Brad, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this too, it also matters how long they're going to be in the story. So in terms of putting the work in. So if they're going to be in a one-off strip, or they're coming in to deliver a line or a punchline or a bit of news, I'm going to put in 5-10 minutes of work. It's not going to be, you know, I'm not doing the complete works of Shakespeare here on this character design. But if like the case with this species that are spiders, I know that they might pop up a lot in the story in the next couple of years. I don't want future me to be mad at present me for phoning it in. So I'm going to put more time into it. So that has an impact on things. How about with you, Brad? If you know a character is a one and done, how quick does that character get designed?
Well, very quickly. But for me, it's not a question of future me and present me and past me. It's future me and present Alex Heberling, because I work with a colorist. and very often, and by the way, this is what makes Alex one of the best colorists in comics as far as I'm concerned. I'll throw her a character and I will tell her nothing about that character, because it's a nothing generic supervillain. It doesn't matter. And she will bring, that's his colors. And part of the deal is, and we've never spoken about it, but part of the deal is, if she says that character has purple hair, they got purple hair. You can't throw somebody with nothing and then sit there and second guess their choices either. But so what has happened over time is, yes, I can throw that at Alex, and Alex will handle it beautifully. But if I've got a character that I know is going to come up time after time after time, it's only fair that I do a complete character turnaround and send that to Alex in advance, so she can work out the colors. She knows what's supposed to be. And it's also kind of like, yeah, well, Brad, you keep forgetting to draw, this part on their back. If you do that and you can go back and look at it, maybe you'll forget, maybe you'll forget less often. But it's good for me, too, to have that character turn around, to remember all those incidental little details that goes into a character design. when I started doing that out of trying to be a better collaborator with my colorist, once I started doing that, my work improved because all of a sudden, A, I had to work out all these issues in advance, and B, I had something already sitting there in my Clip Studio library that I could pull right over as a ready reference when I was drawing this character. So I remember, oh yeah, they look like this from the back. They have this design on their costume from the back. It upped my game. All of which to say, I don't do it all the time, but when I do it, I'm a better person for it.
Yeah, I will say this. So in 24 years of cartooning Sheldon and Drive online, I have produced exactly one turnaround, and my animation friends are going to slap me in the face for this. I've produced exactly one. And the only reason I produced the turnaround was I had hired the Japanese duo Gurihiro to draw a Drive story, right? And I have no Japanese, they have no English, so we were working through a translator. And because language was an issue, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to save them time and trouble, and I'm going to give them a turnaround of one of these species because they would have to draw it a lot. And I needed them to have some kind of resource that language couldn't provide. So I was like, you know what? For the first time in my career, I'm going to do a turnaround. And it was very helpful. It actually was helpful to me. So yes, I recommend them. But here's the truth that I very often default to, which is if it's a one and done character, or sometimes even if it's going to be like a week-long character or, a couple week storyline.
Yeah.
Very often, if I just need a quick cheat, I will master a 3/4 angle of that character. Because if I can master a 3/4 angle, I can do a profile, I can do a straight on, I can probably figure out from behind at this point. But that's me with 24 years of drawing, these comics. I don't know if first year me could have mastered it from just a 3/4. So to direct this question, I do think there is value for a turnaround for a younger cartoonist in trying to figure out how their characters go. Although I can sort of run and gun it if I have to from a 3/4.
Yep. Dave, I think we've got time for one more question here on the show, and it's about freelance. Listen to this. Tyler writes, hey guys, how do you find solid ground in a world of freelancing where monthly income fluctuates, Patreon pledges drop in and drop out, and sales are never consistent? Dave, it's the plight of the freelancer to finish up the show today. What words of solace and advice do we have for Tyler?
Well, there's obviously two things you can do here. You can either up or vary your income, or you can control your expenses, right? Because we all agree the freelance life is it's a roller coaster. You'll have months where you're suddenly making thousands for doing, this or that, and then you'll have a spare desert where you're down making nothing and you feel like you're not worth anything to the world. So what I strongly advise to all artists in good times and in bad is do what you can to build up a 6 months buffer of living expenses. What I mean by that is you have 6 months where you're not bringing in any income. Well, you're not desperate because you've got 6 months savings built up. Well, how do you do that? You cut back on movies, you cut back on video games, you cut back on internet if you have to, or whatever expenses you got. I mean, not internet, but you know what I mean. You can cut back on whatever expenses you can cut back on. Clothes purchases, entertainment usually are the best ones. A slightly less expensive version of a mac and cheese that you were buying for yourself. What I'm getting at is even every little bit that you can save to build up that buffer will help you through the bad months. So savings is one thing. And then obviously that's also paired with controlling costs. But then in terms of income, it is worth having some side hustle, basically, if freelance is your core business, that you can turn to in the way that actors can turn to working in restaurants during the day because it complements their lifestyle. Brad, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, listen, first I'm going to tell you there's a great book that when I was teaching arts entrepreneurship at Husson School of Art, I used this as a textbook. It's called Arts and Numbers by Elaine Grogan-Lattrell. It is a wonderful book that talks about all of these issues. It talks about freelancing for artists. And one of the best, and actually, I never understood this until I read it in the book, and it slapped me in the face. But it said, here's what gets freelancers in trouble every time. is they have a good month and they've got an extra $100, right? Let's say you got found money type of thing. Hey, all of a sudden you get a royalty check or whatever, bang, $100, $100 extra dollars. And then that next month you go, well, listen, I'm not going to think twice about going to watch this movie. First run in the movie theater, it's going to cost me $20, but that's okay because I got an extra $100. And then you're sitting there and you're coming out of the mall and you're like, I'm going to stop over at Chess King and get a new outfit because I don't have anything to worry about. I can spend $40 on that new sweater because I've got an extra $100. It's not going to be a big deal. And on the way home, you stop at the Red Lobster and you get the cheesy biscuits and you get the lobster because it doesn't matter. You got an extra $100. You can spend $20 on lunch. It's not a big deal. And then you get home and you're like, oh, I'd like to watch that movie again. I'm going to sign up for this streaming service. It's only an extra $10, but who cares? I've got that extra $100. You see where this is going. Yes. By the time and
bankruptcy court, yes.
By the time you get to the end of the month, you've spent that extra $100 3 times over. You've spent $300 of that extra $200 or that extra $100. So that's the big mistake that we all make. We all make it as freelancers is when we get that found money, we keep telling ourselves, I got that extra $100. I still got it. That's where what Dave says about budgeting is if you're going to be a freelancer, especially in this day and age, you have to be a budgeter and you have to be a little bit strict with yourself. And that means sometimes saying no to that movie and sometimes saying no to the new sweater at Chess King. It just means
why do you keep defaulting to Chess King? What is it with you and Chess King?
I want Chess King to come back. But it means saying no and staying within your budget. Now that budget also has to have a little bit of entertainment money. I mean, you can't live like a monk. You got to have a little bit of entertainment built into that budget.
I would argue, though, that if you don't have that 6-month buffer, live like a monk until you get that 6-month buffer. Well, that was my argument.
Wrong.
Is
Gloria
wrong. And I did that early in our marriage, where we're like, we're not going out, we're not having drinks, we're not going with friends, we're not going to go to movies, we're not going to do anything, we're not buying video games. So yes, buy bare expenses, like keep your internet going, because that's both from a business perspective and basic entertainment can be useful. But say no to the $60 video game. Say no to the, because a couple of those purchases over a 3 to 9 month period can save you a good chunk of change that can help you out. So really, a couple of things. One is, just start budgeting. You don't have to be a whiz with numbers to do basic budgeting of what is coming in, what is going out. You put it on an Excel sheet or a Google spreadsheet or an Apple numbers sheet, right? You just put down the numbers, you do some basic budgeting, and then I know it sounds ridiculous to someone who hasn't done it yet when you're like, well, Dave said 6 months, to hell with him. How am I going to save it? I can't even pay for XYZ. How would I save 6 months? Just try to save for a week's worth of expenses. Then when you get a week, try 2 weeks. What I'm saying is you can build it up slowly, and it might take a while. It might take a while. But once you have it, trust me, the sense of security and the calmness in your heart as a freelance artist, when you have 6 months of expenses saved up, is going to be worth it. It will have been worth the sacrifice for the calmness that will bring you.
Oh, and before we get too much further, Dave, I want to talk about one other thing that, I mean, listen, we gave Tyler the broccoli. Now let's give Tyler the cake, because there is everything that we talked about is very hard stuff to do. It's got to be done, but it's not as fun. Here's another thing that you can do as a freelancer that will help, and that is this: build up as many passive income streams as you possibly can. And in this, I'm talking about Patreon. Number one is a good one. And if you're running your Patreon right, you should be able to make it through. Of course, you're going to get that beginning of the month Patreon dip, but if you've got your tiers set up right, you should be able to weather that pretty well. And if it is causing a big problem, then that's an indication that you've got something to fix there. Those bumps are hitting you too much. But so Patreon is one passive revenue stream. Having lots of ebooks out on the market and continually promoting those ebooks either on your site or on social media is another one. Remember, I use ebooks all the time, and I make those free Patreon offers. It's like, hey, if you're still a Patreon backer at the end of the month, after your payment clears, you're going to get an ebook on the 1st of next month. And then that ebook goes out for whatever, $1.99, $4.99, whatever it is. And that gives that Patreon exclusive value, but also the more I do that every month, offering more and more stuff, I build up more and more passive revenue because now that all sits out there. Mm-hmm. It's all continually, it's not big numbers. It's not, huge numbers, but the more of those passive revenue streams that you build, the more it all adds up. And it's got to be something that you should be building this into your calendar, continually promoting, continually mentioning. It feels, remember, social media rules, it feels like you're saying it repeatedly. You're not. That person maybe even didn't hear you until the 10th time you said it.
Right. And I will add one more thing there in terms of passive income is that as you start to build up those streams, and additional ones might be, eBay pieces or even commissions, which is more of an active stream, but it's still there. But as artists, we have an ability that other types of creatives don't have, which is the playwright has to wait for a commission. The poet has to wait for a publisher. The actor has to wait for a casting call, right? But we as cartoonists can create our own magic in a way, in the sense that we can start putting up images on eBay. We can start putting out the call for commissions, right? We can start to generate extra income. Yeah. Another additional thing that I was going to recommend is, as that starts to happen and the sort of surplus income that you didn't maybe expect for the month comes in, open up a second bank account from which you are not allowed to pull from. So anytime there is a surplus to what you were expecting for the month, put it in that income. It's a great way to lock down whatever extra gains you've gotten so that you can start to build towards 1 month of savings, 2 months of savings, and you get where I'm going with that. But it's nice to have a second account that you can't pull from.
That you cannot touch.
Yeah. And it's purely for emergency funds. And so...
Dave, I can't tell you how happy I was for you to say that, because it's true. It's true. A poet has to wait for a commission. A playwright has to wait for a publisher, and our listeners are going to have to wait another week for another episode of the ComicLab podcast.
Like butter every week. I love it.
That's right, Dave, and that means it's time for me to say that you've been listening to ComicLab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
Your hosts have been my friend Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and the creator of Evil Inc. at evil-comic.com.
And my good friend Dave Kellett, the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And I'll just remind you that we send out a huge welcome to ladies and gentlemen, everyone here at the Heineken Brewery, the best beer in the world. The ComicLab theme song is... Toiletin from the background. The ComicLab theme song is used with permission from Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
If you love ComicLab, you can rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, and you may hear your review featured on a future episode.
And ComicLab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/ComicLab. So we'll go ahead and say that like you're at a Heineken brewery, patreon.com/Toiletin!
And now it's time for another moment of inspiration from our friend Susan McTaggart.
Oh, friends, hello. Susan McTaggart here, author of the new book, Love is a Buffet with Unlimited Breadsticks, coming out this fall from Penguin Publishers. And friends, I wanted to give you a special sign-off for this week, something to carry you through the difficult days. Friends, I want to tell you, they say you only use 10% of your brain, friends. But go ahead and try that with your kidneys. Go ahead, I dare you. Try it. 10%. See how well you do. Anyway, friends, look for my new book this fall from Penguin Publishing.